Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work. Welcome to KIMEcast. Tony Mikla, Russ Dunning. We got a great opportunity this past week to get out and speak with a group and interact with a group. This is a junior football program, so we had youth. There was 7th, 8th graders been playing football. The season was ending, so it was the end of the year banquet, and the attention was on the coaches asked us to speak about this idea of and then put the attention on what can these guys do to prepare themselves for the following year. So, which is such a great question. So, we'll spend some time here discussing what we talked about, and I think how that applies to so many development youth athletes. This kind of age range of junior high, especially maybe like 11, 12 years old to 14, 15-year-olds is a big transitional time period. And I think this is such a critical time where we can really have a big impact on the body and how it evolves and how it adapts. It's unbelievable. There's a couple things that are going on during this time that's really critical. So usually the kids, and guys and girls are a little different here. Usually girls go a little bit sooner than guys, and then guys, jump into it full force somewhere around 7th, 8th grade, and then but they can have a much longer transition. So I think that's something to speak to and something to be aware of. Is that for boys, the transition can take 5 to 6 years, whereas girls seem to see it really rapid for maybe 2 years, kind of 12 to 14, and then it really kind of shuts off pretty quickly. Might get a little bit of a lingering tail, but not quite as much as we see on the boy side, I think. But nonetheless, it's a pretty cool opportunity to really kind of have big intervention with these folks and really make a difference in their lives, not only during that time period and for the next few years, whether in sports or whatever, but really from a lifelong standpoint is pretty incredible. So it was an awesome opportunity to get to speak to them and talk to them about what can they do to really prepare themselves for this next 6 months. So the big goal, and everybody's always, talks about, is like, well, let's get stronger. As a football team, let's get stronger. So let's break that down a little bit to be like, okay, if I want to get stronger and I'm 12, what should I do? Should I load the way I would load when I'm 16? Should I just do body weight, or are weights dangerous? I have so many dads that come to me at every event we could think of, be like, yeah, our kids have been in this age group now for the last 3 years. So they're like, it's too early. I don't want my son to start weightlifting. And they may have played college football. They may have played college sports, and a lot of these guys did. And they'd be like, I didn't even start lifting until I was like a sophomore or a junior in high school. And for me personally, we started lifting about my sophomore years, where I got into it quite a bit. But the evidence is not there. This is a big myth that lifting at a young age is a bad thing and stunts growth and those types of things. But I think we have to be very strategic about how we do it still.
I think research in this space is insanely hard because of how many variables we have. So when people typically think of strength, most people would envision a barbell, a rack, you get underneath and you squat.
Right.
And then you bench press. And then so that's usually the strength. Maybe some people will think of machines. You can move a certain weight with a push, pull, or some leg extension. And then others that may be more advanced thinkers in this space would think of elite level calisthenics. Think like a gymnast or a wrestler.
Or the military.
Yeah, or the military. And so I think you can recognize that strength has quite a few different definitions.
I think that's a great point when you think back, like who we are. We're all like dads in our 40s. And like what did we do 25 years ago, 30 years ago, and that was what it was. It was either calisthenic stuff, it was in the weight room, bench press, squat, people were doing Olympic lifts and cleans, but there wasn't this functional fitness awareness or some of these functional fitness like CrossFit type of environments weren't as popular when we were in that age group. So It's one of those things where like, well, that's what we did. I haven't done it for 25 years, so I'm going to do it again, which is why they're asking like, what's best practice now? But it's interesting having to compete against what they thought was great or what they hated,
Yeah.
Like my football coach did this. I don't know if it was right or wrong. We did it. It seemed stupid at the time, but I did get stronger, right? That's the argument, Yeah.
Well, and so many of us, myself included, the human mind kind of falls guilty to, let's find someone uber successful and let's copy them. I'm going to copy what Usain Bolt did. I'm going to copy what Roger Federer did. I'm going to copy what LeBron does. I'm going to copy what Tom Brady does. And you're taking like an elite, the 0.00001%, whatever they did must be the best thing. And forget DNA, forget opportunity, forget all elements of the sport. They're the best athletes, so whatever they did must be the best. And it's a really faulty logic on, I think this principle that strength might not help with performance as much as we might think. But I think strength can help with durability in a very powerful way. And if you are strong enough, it merely gives you the opportunity to play and play and play again. So I think it's more of an opportunity game rather than a performance game. So don't look at the best performer and think like their strength routine must be the winning thing.
Yeah,
that's the wrong thought. It's not strong enough. It's not a strong correlation to the best soccer athlete or best baseball athlete. It's a component, but not the most powerful component that leads to success.
Yeah. There's so many natural gifts there that make it possible for someone to succeed like that, so many variables. But I do think what they can do, well, we know that at this time frame the kids are growing, so the bone structures are growing very, very fast. So we know these structures are growing the fastest of almost anything in the body. So the bones will grow very, very quickly. You can see these big growth spurts in folks where they might grow anywhere from 3 to 6 inches in the period of like a month or two. And usually correlated with that, you'll know this is happening where they'll want to sleep a lot more. The kids are going to be tired. They're just going to be kind of dragging a little bit. They're usually quite hungry preceding this. You'll see that they'll be eating like a tremendous amount more food for maybe a couple weeks prior to this going on, and then they suddenly like won't be nearly as hungry. They'll like shut it off or like shut it down quite a bit. You'll see these like cycles they go through. So if you're really sensitive to it, you can notice there's a big food intake increase, and then there's a big sleep increase, and those usually kind of one then the other, and then you'll see a growth spurt usually happen in that window.
Yeah, and sometimes the feet might grow like a month or two before. The shoe size just changed twice, but yet their height barely, and then boom.
Yeah.
It's like a trigger.
Yeah. So some kids are more spurty. Some kids are more, they just do a little bit at a time over a long period of time. But the thing to think about here is that from what do you do about this? Okay, when the bones grow, they get longer in a hurry. So you have this huge increase in length. The second tissue to grow would be the muscle tissue would grow the second fastest. So it adapts that new length. So if you want to move something and you're using leverage, basically the muscular system is somewhat of a leverage played game. So if I want to extend my knee and the bones that move my knee are now each 2 inches longer, my tibia is 2 inches longer, my femur is 2 inches longer, the force I need to move that item, now it weighs more and it's longer, so I need much more force. So the muscle has to get much stronger. So that grows second. It's always a little bit behind. So this is where you see someone with a big growth spurt and then they're kind of like clunky. They look kind of like a baby deer. They're not that organized in their movement mechanics because the muscle, not only its strength, but its coordination lacks behind the bone structure change. So usually you'll see that period of time afterwards, and I think that can be shortened. I think that could be enhanced, and that's where training can really be a factor. And then the third type of tissue would be like the tendon. So the tendons are the ligaments, but the tendons are the connection of the muscle to the bone itself. And that tendon is very, very slow to adapt. So you have this big bone length increase, then you have this muscle strength that comes along after a couple of months, and then you have this tendon still lagging behind. And I think this is one of the reasons we see in youth where we have certainly patella tendonitis or osteoarthritis is the big one. We get it in the elbow as well. You might get it in the shoulder a little bit on some of that stuff. You might get a high hamstring or an ischial tuberosity or the ilium, the anterior and the ASIS will also kind of you can get either some tendonitis things there or you can actually get a fracture are all common injuries. And I think the reasoning behind this is that you get this big increase in leverage, you get a little bit increase in strength, and you have this really slow tendon. The tendon is what controls the speed of the contraction. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could speak more to that, to the ability of this like spring-like mechanism and how fast that thing works. And if it's kind of slow, well, then the load distribution is going to be off.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have bone, you have all the fascial network, and then you have really like the muscle tendinous, how we contract and really how we move. And they change at different rates. So I think we see with the girls, me having 3 girls, I'm kind of keenly attuned to this, that the knees will often create a valgus position early in growth. So for a typical female, they'll kind of get this valgus position from age sometimes like 10, even to like 12 to 13. And then the valgus position, which is an inward knee angle, It is what is thought of, both the width of the hips and the inward angle of the knees, creating a valgus position, is what's thought to be the driving force behind a lot of the knee injuries in female athletes. But with the right stress and the right movement and a little bit of luck, that valgus position becomes a little more of a varus stress, and they start straightening out. So the girls will kind of literally change, their skeletal shape will change quite a bit from age 10 to 15. Boys don't quite have the width of the hips, so they don't really have that, the knee angle positions. They just, get super tall. They get super tall in a hurry. But both with the females and the males, the boys and girls, we still have an issue of, as the bone explodes with length, because like you said, the fascial system and the connective tissue system is just slower to adapt to that length. So you'll see these weird restrictions. You'll see it in the feet, where they'll start to get like a little bit of a flatter feet, and they like rotating the foot out. You'll see it in the knees and the groin. Their groin might only open up 60 degrees, and then therein lies a lot of the fascial restriction on the inside of the thigh. And then you'll see it on the backside. They can't touch their toe without their back excessively rounding, and that posterior line gets restricted. And for all of these types, you'll see some pretty funky movement patterns when you do jumping and when you run and when you try and cut.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like as a parent, you watch your kid be able to touch their toes and they're great at it, and then like 6 months later, like they're 6
You've lost it.
They've lost it completely. It's pretty amazing. So I think what do we do with these folks? Do we just load them in the way that we load other folks when they're more skeletally mature? And I think the answer to that is no, but yes, you can load them. So not the same way. So the thing is they got to own their body positions. So as they're going through these changes, it's very important that you challenge their body where they actually have to learn these new mechanics, they have to learn the new angles, they have to learn the new tools that they're getting and learn how to use them effectively. So exposure to movement is very, very important. So we're big fans of learn your body, learn how to use the range of motion, learn full range, learn how to get full depth in your squat, learn how to get a longer stride in your lunge, learn how to use these positions, and then own those positions. Own your own body, own a mild amount of resistance first, be able to control that, and then once you demonstrate that, then you think you can move to more higher levels of load.
I think the lower extremity is the big thing to master. I'm not seeing as many issues with shoulder and neck mechanics. The spine is the ultimate compensator, but from the hips to the big toe, we see a lot of wonky positions. Yeah. And relearning how to, for the 16-year-old in the weight room, hopefully they can all squat, lunge, and hinge. But for the 12-year-old, 13 and 14, just doing a whole bunch of squats, lunges, and hinges doesn't quite fix it. So when we do like a dynamic warm-up, I think you can really open that up into a lot of different planes, whether it's a lateral lunge or a Bulgarian split. There's a lot of variations to split squats. I think you can do some scooping techniques and really kind of like focus on even like a Cossack squat. You can find these different angles. And I've come to think of doing, what we used to, what we still call a dynamic warm-up, but really just doing calisthenics. I think of it as give the developing athlete a problem to solve and let them slowly solve it over the course of weeks, if not months. And if you don't give them a difficult problem to solve, they might not ever solve it. You shouldn't just assume, they'll naturally grow and be amazing. Nope. They could actually naturally grow and look like crap for the rest of their life. There's plenty of those people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you learn it now, the power you get later. So what's an example of that? What's an example of a problem you give them to solve?
Yeah. How about a lateral lunge where you touch the ground and your heels stay on the ground? That would be like some rules to the game. Yeah. And then they try and do it and their heel comes up. Like, that's hard. Like, I know. It is hard. It would be one such example. Or holding on to a big med ball and sinking as low as you can into a squat. But just somehow by squeezing a big med ball and loading it in front, it kind of cues things in a really nice way. And that's where I think box squats are nice, because you're saying, I want you to squat to that depth. Put your hips on that box. And so, you're challenging a depth position, you're giving a game where their heels need to stay on the ground, or maybe the heels don't. You're doing a split squat where their front heel has to lift up. So finding those positions. We like the T position. Can you form a T where your trunk and your back leg form a straight line and it's parallel to the ground? very hard move.
Yeah.
So I think giving like little games to this, none of it's ever easy. Should we do this with adults all the time?
Yep.
So, but giving it to kids, they all can solve it. That's the thing. Our job is to find a difficult enough problem that they can solve in the near future. If they're not going to solve it for 3 years, don't beat them up on it.
Yeah, they won't.
Give them something to solve in the next month or 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think it's a good perspective. No, I add something to that in the fact that I think in coaching these boys, so I have a team, a basketball team, there's 12 kids on the team, and we strength train them as a team twice a week.
14, 15 years?
They're 14, yeah. They're 8th graders. Well, they're 13 and 14, 7th and 8th graders. So there's a good mix there. But it's interesting because there's already this, testosterone pressure of like, okay, let's bench press or let's squat and let's put a bar on my back. And I heard my friend said he could squat 135 pounds or 155 pounds or whatever it is, or this guy can deadlift, 200 pounds. Or I don't know where they see it, or they're talking to somebody's got an older brother that can do it. So they got challenged, and that just trickles down so fast, where it's like, it's really hard to coach them to be like, that's not the goal today. The goal is like, let's own this movement, keep your heels down, sit down to this depth. I like the box use as well, like some sort of thing. They've got to make sure you hit this target, because they will do whatever, the human body will do whatever it takes to win whatever the goal is. So if the goal is squat 200, well, that's no problem. They'll just go down halfway and come back up and be like, I did the 200. Like, well, you put 200 on your back. Yes, you didn't squat it though.
Yeah.
You kind of like crouched down and then you stood back up. That doesn't really count.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of like, well, what are you talking about? I did it. Like, well, so you have to have these really detailed rules.
Yeah, because lifting weight is, in essence, you're just changing the game. You're saying, I want you to move this heavy weight. And if they haven't won the game of owning their body weight to a full depth position, using, what we would say great mechanics, and a lot of people might say, like, well, what is great mechanics? Since your spine is the ultimate compensator, can you keep that sucker at a neutral curve through most of the range? I think that's a universal theme. And then what you're going to find on Instagram is all the people who are able to do a Jefferson curl with 300 pounds and a rounded back. And, I think it's great to have Instagram challenge conventional wisdom, but you also have to stand for something. And I guarantee you, the people who can break all the rules, learn rules first. And they were able to put their butt cheeks on the ground in a low squat with their spine mostly straight, and then they learn how to break the rules. So you have to create some kind of games, and I think as physical therapists, I love working with young athletes. I love seeing a 14-year-old with an ankle sprain, because I'm going to look at their squat. I already know it's like snot, and just because I'm working on the ankle sprain doesn't mean that we're not going to address all of it. So I try and use physical therapy at a youth sports medicine as just an opportunity. Hey, we're just going to clean up everything for the rest of your life right about now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so much fun. I've noticed on the team I have, we have two of the bigger guys have probably the worst movement mechanics, which is pretty typical. Yeah, these guys are bigger, taller. They tend to move poorly because of what we talked about, the speed of their growth. Where you got some little guys that haven't really grown as much yet, or maybe they're not going to get as big, and you can see they move much more effectively. This is something we've all seen in sports and have witnessed over the years. But I think that we can improve the adaptation strategy of the bigger kids by giving them some of these stimuli, because everybody's been afraid or doesn't know what to do for years, where you just put them underneath the barbell and they go lift. Like, that's not the right strategy, I don't think. So to give you an example, with this team, we progressed the squatting mechanics. So we started with goblet squatting with the kettlebell, and we spent 3 or 4 months there working on getting depth, heels down, getting their feet somewhat, forward to a little bit of external rotation. We weren't terribly detailed about that, but we did not want like a big external rotation moment, a lot of knee valgus. So we really kind of tried to fix that all up, get their knees apart so they were strong in the squat and kind of own the bottom position. And then we moved to a front squat, and with front squat, we started with the bar and then moved our way up to, I like these guys to be able to front squat like at least 95 to maybe 110, 115 pounds. I feel like once you put 95 on the bar in a front squat position, you've got to have a back, you got to have a trunk, you've got to be able to hold that chest up. And if you can do that well, and once you can hold at least 95 pounds, maybe 115 pounds is a better number. But once you get up into that zone, you're starting to develop the tools you need, where now putting the bar on your back becomes a viable option. It becomes much more difficult to progress with the bar on the front. I think you could take the front squat to 135, but the patience to do that is tough because that's a pretty heavy lift.
Yeah.
So the young men want to move to the back squat. They want to be back squatting, especially when their friends are doing it incorrectly. So it's really hard to stay disciplined to be like, all right, we're going to front squat, do it well. Once we've learned those mechanics, we can throw some back squat stuff in, but I'll typically now alternate where we'll back squat a day and then front squat a different day, or we'll warm up front squatting and then we'll back squat a couple sets at the end in an effort to get them to learn all of these different skills. Because now they're coming into 8th grade, and they're in 8th grade now. As they go into their freshman year, I know they're going to get back squatted right out of the gate when they join a football program or join another team or join a weightlifting program. So I want to make sure they're introduced to it and can kind of own that position. But it's been a year-long transition, just to give some perspective on time.
Yeah, I think we think of like calisthenics of like it could be a bodyweight hinge, squat, and lunge. And the lunge I think is really magical because you can hit all these different angles to challenge the groin, challenge the abductors and adductors, and challenge the feet, which is a whole new realm of how the ankles are able to manage to put themselves together in different positions. And that's why I love about a split squat. I don't think you could do a split squat incorrectly. I think the nature of a split squat is change your stance, now get low. And if you can do that while keeping your spine mostly up tall, unless you decide to break form and say, hey, now I want you to reach forward and let's see how your coordination gets put together. And I think that's of such value also that you can do a loaded squat. And that might be a nice way of looking at it, is practicing squatting and then do a ton of variations of all of these split patterns so that you can come back and load the squat, and we're looking pretty good.
Yep, 100%. I think this either lunging or split squatting or something like that's a phenomenal way to train folks, is you get the opportunity to be obviously at different angles where you can be linear, you can be more lateral, you can be more rotational, and everything in between. You can go the opposite direction. You can go like 120 degrees around the lunge matrix curve there, and I think that's a great way to train. We do that with all of our kids all the time. Both directions, both sides. If you can do it barefoot or just do it in socks or something, or a minimalist shoe, so you let that foot develop and let them control that balance, is really important.
I think what you said, the lunge matrix, might be pretty new for some of the listeners. Imagine a clock, and you're stepping at 12 o'clock, stepping at 1:30, stepping at 3, at 4:30, at 6, at 7:30. If you can, step at 9 p.m. That one's hard. We call that the curtsy, a curtsy split squat or a curtsy lunge, and that's hitting basically 3/4 of a circle. What a great way of training every single movement through your ankle, your knee, and your hip, and all these angles address adductors and abductors and kind of help you put your body together in balance. And what I love about that is most athletes don't have a hard time doing the movement. And they might have a hard time doing it 100 times, but the movement they can get. Whereas the squat, I'd say the squat, 9 out of 10 athletes are going to look pretty poor. Pretty poor.
In the beginning, especially when it's loaded. Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting, we look at sports too, is you look at what does a sport built out of, and most sports, 90% of the movements are on one leg, right? So getting an athlete into one leg or a split stance position is going to be much more athletic. It's going to be much more sports oriented. So they've been doing for the last several years on their own as a kid, right? They're very, very good in those environments. Whereas when you go do a squat or a deadlift, that's a 2-leg on the ground, 2-leg force activity. It's not as common for them, because you don't really use that in most sports often. Some sports you do. You'll see it a bit obviously in wrestling, or if you're a lineman in football, or times where 2 feet are on the ground and pushing is important. But for the most part, most sports and activities are going to be a single leg. And if you look at this on a bigger cycle, I was thinking about this from a life cycle standpoint. When you're young and athletic, you're on one leg all the time, playing all these different sports and moving around, right? And then as you kind of get out of sports, you do a little bit less one-legged things, but you're still walking, which is a one-legged activity. You're still doing stairs, which is a one-legged activity. You can move pretty independently, no problem. And then we look at some of the more elderly folks as people get a bit older, and we start to look at how they move. And they're very hesitant to be on one leg, right? So then you see the stance, the stride and walking decrease while they're starting to get their feet closer and closer together to a point where they're shuffling, meaning they don't ever pick one foot off the ground, right? So they're on 2 feet all the time in an effort to kind of sustain more balance. So if you just think about that, like how the body self adapts. Be like, hey, I'm really good on one leg as an athlete, and then as I age, I need 2 feet on the ground to be more stable. And we think about how we train people. I think it's important.
I think it's so magical to consider. So I'm appreciating all the biomechanics of what you just said. And when you're in a split position or on one leg, you're challenging the rotary tissue about the ankle and the hip and the core. And then you're challenging the medial and lateral supports, the adductors and abductors that go all the way through. And then obviously at the lateral core. You're challenging all these unique tissues that need to coordinate and instantaneously stabilize the system to do a pattern. When you're in a bilateral squat or a bilateral hinge, those offset one another, so there's no stress. There's no rotary stress or medial to lateral stress when you do a bilateral pattern. And to some degree, I wonder if that might be like one of the biggest flaws of most strength routines is, you might develop power and mass and reaction in a linear vertical way through a squat or a high pull or a hang cling. But without these rotary stresses, are you actually helping the athlete as much as you could be? And I think, if we can start calisthenics with appreciating that, you might unlock movement. And if you can maintain that in addition to your hang clean, high pull, power clean mentality, I think it's vital. But I've seen my fair share of people who can power clean 315 pounds and they got a weak stomach. And that blows my mind to see a weak core on a big linebacker that can lift the house with a power clean.
But it's because it's in a single direction. So same way you said, I'll just say it differently, with the same ideas. A weight room typically, and what we all grew up with as a traditional weight room or gym environment, is that there's machine weights. When you're doing machine weights, the force only goes in one direction. Whatever way you can push the pad in front of you, it's just one direction. So it's unidirectional. Well, sports don't operate that way. They open 3 dimensions. So now you're only lifting in one direction, which doesn't really help you as an overall athlete. The other thing you see in like the free weight environment is using the barbell. So deadlift, squat, power cleans, bench press is kind of the standard. So if you are playing football or have played football, those are most likely your kind of big 4 lifts. And then there might be some kind of a row or maybe a pull-up or whatever. But the weight room in general is usually designed around the barbell or designed around a machine. And when you have those designations, it only means you can move in one direction or in one plane of motion. When you're doing barbell work, it's almost, as you said, almost always vertical, or what we would call linear, like it's in a similar plane. None of the motions, deadlift, squat, power clean, bench press, pull up, whatever, rows, none of those have a lateral component and none of those have a rotational component. But if you look at sports, that's what sports are. So what we're suggesting is when you're training these youth people, more of a functional fitness mantra or more of this dynamic looking at things in 3 planes is really a critical element to help them develop, help them learn their body, help them use their body as they're making these gains over a period of time.
There are so many elite level athletes at all different sports that have brutally destroyed their body over their sport career and their fitness life, where knee replacements and hip replacements and spine fusions, we see it earlier and earlier. I've treated spine fusions of female athletes in their late 30s after playing pro sports. I mean, this is unfortunately quite common. And I just did like a little quick search online, and I asked, did Jack LaLanne ever have a joint replacement? And the answer is no. So Jack LaLanne, considered the fitness guru, he was, I think the modern gym is because of this man. He died a few years ago, lived to the ripe old age of in his mid to late 90s, and he was healthy all the way through his mid to late 90s. But the key thing is, his joints were fine. He didn't have any rotator cuff surgery or hamstring surgery or hip replacement. And what's so special about him is this was before barbells were popular. It was before the Arnold Schwarzenegger era. Mm-hmm. So bodybuilding wasn't popular, powerlifting wasn't popular. He did calisthenics, and he did a lot of conditioning fitness feats. But he had a phenomenal capability with his body without really ever touching anything like, recognizably very heavy. And he maintained this fitness life throughout. Now we see, I think certain athletes, particularly in tennis, maybe to some degree in some of the, I know in the martial arts world, you'll see elite athletes that really don't touch the barbell. And I think we're going to see a lot more of them. I think that might be a big trend. Maybe not in football, because you just need so much mass in football that you have to have that external weight to grow. But I think we're going to enter into a realm where it's the rejection of the CrossFit mentality, which is the AMRAP, do as many as you can with heavy weight and destroy the body. I think we're going to see a movement further and further away from CrossFit. I think you're going to see a movement away from Olympic lifting on a whole, because it takes such an investment of energy to be good underneath the bar. And I think we've already been seeing the movement away from powerlifting. So the biggest 3 I wouldn't say CrossFit should be in there, but Olympic lifting and
the
powerlifting.
CrossFit's not wrong. It's just that the programming is debatable.
Yeah,
the movements aren't necessarily bad. It's just the
yeah. They brought in calisthenics and they brought in barbell work, but they destroyed people with seeing how many you can do inside of 7 minutes and like reward that.
Yeah, rewarding reps over a limited period of time is a dangerous combination in the weight room.
Yeah, but we had a great talk with Ian Book a little bit, and he and I got a long chat about how Patrick Mahomes trains. I think that will become the norm very, very soon, where you're really working on these multi-directional, multi-planar movement patterns to unlock your athletic potential.
Yeah, no, I think you made a good point there. I think if we think about how we got here as to what you see now, you go into the gym and what do you see? I think it's important to recognize where we came, or how we got here. So the reason why a gym exists now, like the Nautilus machines, if you will, or the isolation machines, where you go into a gym and they're all the machine weights, and you could do a chest press, you could do a curl, you do triceps, whatever it is, it's an isolated body group. That's a bodybuilding device that was really popularized by Schwarzenegger, and that's where the gym really emerged, like in the late 70s and 80s. That's where they took off, and that's where you see it today, as far as your membership-based gyms. And then you have your weight rooms, like a college weight room or a high school weight room, and those are designed very much around football. And everyone knows this, and everyone who's involved, if you don't play football and you go to the weight room, you know it immediately, because you basically are thrown into like a football mantra, and you're like, well, what happened? I don't really want to play football. Like, well, that's what the gym's built for. They don't say that, but that's really what happens. So when you're in college, there's 18 teams and there's like 4 strength coaches. And every team wants to get in the weight room and work out, because we all know that getting a team bigger, faster, and stronger contributes to more success. It decreases injury risk. There's many benefits. So the teams want to get in there and train. But the weight room either isn't big enough or there isn't time. So the traditional thing is, you basically in 1 hour, you can get 5 main lifts in, right? So if you have a team of 20 to 40 athletes and you're going to put them through the weight room and you have 1 to 2 coaches for that whole team, you're kind of limited to like 5 main exercises to get the job done and get a lot of bang for your buck. So that's usually like a squat, a deadlift, an Olympic lift is probably the first thing you would do. And then you might get an upper body push and upper body pull, which could be a push-up, pull-up, bench press, row, bent over row. Something that's easy to load, something that's easy to change weights on, something that runs in like a circuit formation where you're going to have guys rotate in and out of it quickly, and it doesn't require a lot of setup or a lot of coaching. Mm-hmm. So that's why we have the weight rooms.
Logistics.
Yeah, that's why we have the weight rooms at today. And CrossFit is exactly the same concept. It takes football lifts, all those same lifts, hinging, squatting, deadlifting, Olympic lifting, power cleaning, snatching, whatever. And then it throws in a few med ball things, and then it just programs them to time as opposed to weight or to power, right? Mm-hmm. So you see it still there. But where we don't see as much yet is where you really need a coach, which is what we're talking to. Like if you really want to develop a person, develop a human, whether it be a youth person or any age group for that matter, moving in multiple planes of motion, using multiple load restrictions like high loads, low loads, having a ball close to your body versus moving it away from your body. These different things are really going to load the body in different ways, and they're going to cause real development, real skills. And this is what you see when you watch like a Tom Brady thing or you watch a Mahomes thing. You're going to see these higher level things and you see them working with a trainer in a very small group, small environment, because you need a coach to take you through these more non-traditional movements. But they're coming better and better with apps and with social media. Everybody's seeing movements, seeing people practice things, and people can now duplicate these things much better. Mm-hmm. Like a lunge matrix will not be rare, in the next 10 years. That'll be a normal thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think getting stronger with an external load still causes really some wonderful things. So I didn't mean to poo-poo the whole thing, but when you have added stress, your bone grows more aggressively, and your muscles sure grow a lot more when you have that extra stress.
Yeah.
And I think if we can park that, there is room to actually just get size, but there's also a lot of room to get coordinated. And I think it's probably safe to say a principle is that coordination should precede hypertrophy gains. So if you're looking to grow the body, you literally want more mass on this person to support their long frame and that mass is important because it's great to be powerful and jump high and sprint, but if you don't have some mass to you, it's hard to overcome the other person. Many sports are going to have some favoritism to just people that just are are bigger, more muscular.
Yeah.
But coordination and stability and owning your patterns needs to precede that. And those athletes that are able to gravitate that and solve those problems more efficiently, within a year, they're able to nail down these patterns. They're going to progress really quick with this typical gym program. And those athletes that weren't given that opportunity to solve those problems, they're going to suffer. Those ones are going to hurt their back, hurt their shoulder, hurt their knees, or they just don't really advance. It's just a bad program. They're not gaining the weights that they want. They're not getting as strong as they want because they don't know how to do the movement because they didn't solve the prior problems. They passed 8th grade, but really they didn't.
Yeah. I'll challenge that just slightly to say that I think you said it, you have to have the movement quality has to precede the load, and I think that it can happen at the same time. It would be my only counter to that, but otherwise I totally agree because I think that they need to learn a movement pattern. That's required, and that's what's not being done. That's the concern that everyone should have about when does your kid get in the weight room. Well, if they haven't mastered how to move their basic movement patterns and the coach that's coaching them is not coaching movement skills, that's a problem. So we all definitely will agree on that. Now, if you have a kid and you only work on movement skills and you don't load them, they're going to be bored to death, and the body may not find that those movement skills are valuable enough to keep.
True.
Because you haven't put enough load on them. So I think you can do both, but the key here is you have to have a skilled intervention.
Yeah.
Where you load the body, you load the tissue, and then you also put the movements, you put them in positions where they have to be, where they're safe but challenged. Well, where we go wrong is if it's hey, let's lift something really heavy in a traditional way, like with a barbell. There's nowhere in any sport where lifting a barbell is part of the activity. Mm-hmm. So getting great at that is its own sport. It's called powerlifting or Olympic lifting, and we should respect it as such that if you're going to train those things, it might be a career-long 4, 5, 6 year engagement just to get good at that skill set. Whereas doing a squat with a medicine ball is much more like something you're going to do on a regular basis, and you can learn that, you can get stronger with it, and they can grow, which I know is what you're saying, but just
I completely agree, yeah. And I think let's go back to what is strength training, and I think strength training from a neuromuscular standpoint is doing something hard enough where you could probably only do it 4, 5 to 8 times, and gaining mass, growing the muscle tendon system. Lives usually between doing something between 8 and 15 times, where you're by number 15, I can't do 16. So if you kind of want to simplify, strength for hypertrophy and strength for neurological purposes, it lives there. And I think when you're practicing strength and learning how to become more coordinated with an external weight, you're hopefully not quite at that load. Maybe you're doing something that you could own 30 times, and you're just getting better and better and better at it. And I think that's where the skilled coach is, where they give someone a kettlebell that's 35 pounds, or they do just the barbell or maybe some training plates. And you say to yourself, I know you're strong enough to move this weight. I want to see if you can solve the problem of how well you're able to move this.
That's a great point. So that's because that hit me the other day. I was talking to this young guy, 14-year-old, plays football, great kid. And I was asking him about what his coach and what he'd done in the weight room before. And he's like, oh yeah, we were doing trap bar deadlifting and we did 6 sets of 3. And I was just like, what? Why?
Yeah.
You're 14 years old, you weigh 120 pounds, 115 pounds. Why would you do 3 reps?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe 6 sets of 3 starts to get us closer to the ballpark, but it's still only 18 total repetitions.
Right.
What you need is 100 reps.
Yeah.
Right. Let's do 5 sets of 10 or 12 with a weight that's you get tired with and you get exhausted with. But we want to hone the pattern so you master the pattern. You're not going to learn a pattern in 3 reps.
Yeah. The 6 times 3 is someone who's very skilled at the lift. Yeah. This is a 17, 18-year-old that's priming their strength in preparation for do some very hang cleans or strong power cleans. This is someone who's already very skilled and can adapt to that stress, which if you're doing 6 sets of 3, you're operating at 80, 85%.
Easy.
If you do 6 sets of 3 at 40%, that's nothing. That's just silliness. You might as well be just doing push-ups. It's
It's amazing. It's if you want to do max effort with a kid that age, then jump them. Yeah. That's jump as high as you can, max effort, right? Yeah. You don't have to load it. I don't think that loading it in that type of a sequencing delivers the benefits that we see. And I agree with you completely. They've mastered the movement if they're older, and they have a skeletally mature system where loading it that way is going to force more adaptation, which is what we want in a positive way at that time. But you put that much load on a more undeveloped skeleton, it's not necessarily bad for it. It's just not as good as it could be. Like we just kind of are missing some of the mark.
Yeah.
Because if there is a bad habit in that movement pattern, it's going to be stuck.
Yeah.
It is going to be really, really hard to break if you've done it at that kind of load, that kind of resistance, because that's where the body, it does, when you make it fail, it learns a strategy, and that becomes its strategy to use because you don't use it very often.
Well, here's the nuance to it is right now we are talking about complexity of training a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old. And for the listener, they're kind of like, geez, it seems so complicated. Why even do it? If you don't do it, I feel for your young athletes because they're in a school, in a desk, sitting all day. Or they're on the couch in front of the TV. So if you don't do this, you are so worse off. So I'd much rather have people have been doing something that's safe, that they won't get hurt. But then the next level is let's challenge movement and coordination and get better at moving in an external load that's on the lighter end. So I did a lot of testing of these 12, 13, and 14-year-old female soccer athletes between 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And I gave them a routine to do. And in the routine, I asked only for a 10-pound dumbbell. And I gave them a very complete routine that they could do it 3 times a week for the next 6 weeks. And all I wanted was a 10-pound dumbbell. And the thought was, okay, do these split variations and front variations and hinge variations. If they're relatively easy body weight, now I want you to add 10 pounds. You can hold it in your right hand, you can hold it in your left hand. And that does speak to like the next topic, which I have this thought, I don't think your core could be strong enough. And then what is core training? And when you do any of these lower extremity patterns, which you should be doing all 3, squat, hinge, and split stance, and when you load up one side, that's the best core exercise there is. If you hold it in front, especially if it's kind of heavy, you realize how hard your stomach has to work. The back will turn on and the stomach has to pair itself, but it has to pair itself in this rotary sideways stress, which is the best type of core exercise.
Yeah. It's not in a crunch philosophy or not only in a plank position.
Right. I think planks are nice. I think side planks are nice. I think wipers are nice. I think going off a Roman chair, I really like doing it because it allows me to overload different parts of my trunk. But what's all that for is to challenge myself where the load is not perfectly right in my spine because that's the majority of sports.
I have to say the wipers thing, I'm shocked at how difficult that is for this age group.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like really, really hard.
Yeah, and you don't know why. Is it like the adductors? Is it the hips? Is it just the side, the TA or oblique? It's like, it's all hard.
It's a disaster.
Yeah, that leg wants to just completely fall, and it's like...
They can't do it.
Yeah.
They can't keep their legs up at 90. Their legs are falling down. They're falling... When I first gave it, I give it to this group often, and I was like, just lie down, do this. And I thought they'd just walk through it, right? They could do push-ups. These guys are doing 10, 12 pull-ups. They're doing like 25, 30 push-ups. I mean, it's a reasonably strong group.
Yeah.
And then like, hey, do wipers. They all play baseball. There's like 10
they
of the 12
rotate
play
for
baseball.
a living. Yeah.
And they like literally are falling apart. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like, talk about, and this is early on, so they gotten a lot better at it, but holy moly, it was horrible. It was really horrible. I was thinking like, why is this developmental person so poor? Yeah. They're rotational athletes. They throw a med ball off the wall and it snaps. Like it's impressive. But then they go to a wiper and it's bad. I wonder if it's like, size of the legs and strength ratio. Like, is that just overwhelming for them? And then we also think that like, this is really not natural. Generating leg force. Usually the legs are on the ground and you're generating upper type force.
Right. So this open chain.
This is reversal of that. Yeah. So you wonder if the obliques aren't developed enough yet, but yeah, I don't have the exact answer, but I've really been surprised by that.
It's a fun one. I've always loved that exercise. You're lying on your back, your legs are at 90 degrees, your arms are out to the side, and you say, hey, bring your legs over 45 degrees, and then switch sides. And then as you get stronger, it goes to 60 degrees and maybe even touches the ground. And if you really want to kind of keep it nice, get their butt to the wall and get the legs and let the wall be a guide. Mm-hmm. And then next level would be keep the head up the whole time. But I think there's a few different levels to it. And I've always considered it's a body weight payoff.
That's fantastic. It's a very, very good drill. So back to like, what does that mean and what does the core do? I think this exercise is a good example of maybe a counter to how people think about what the core does. So growing up, once again, in the time we did, everybody's doing crunches. Planks have become much more popular, but crunches, V-ups, you name it, anything that kind of crunches
Russian
the abs.
twists.
Yeah, those are all like big core things. And so the goal, of course, is besides getting a 6 or an 8-pack, is that you strengthen your abs so that you actually become a better athlete. But if you notice, like, elite athletes don't do a ton of crunches and they have unbelievable abs, right? So you have to ask yourself, okay, well, how did they get them? Because crunches isn't what got them there. Like you mentioned, Usain Bolt or like Tyson Gay or, some of these guys are just unbelievable abs, but they don't do crunches. So how do they get there? So if you think about what the trunk is, or the core, if you will, it's the combination of like the hips and pelvis, the lumbar spine, and the rib cage. And what this abdominal area is, if you look at the way it's designed, these muscles are like sheets. So they're like sheets of paper. They're incredibly thin. The obliques are very, very thin. The rectus abdominis is very, very thin. The muscles around the spine itself, like the rector spinae, and then you get into the multifidi, those are much thicker, much more robust. And you think about, is there anything else in the body that looks like these thin sheets of paper that we see in the obliques or in the rectus abdominis? And we don't really have that. If you look at muscles you could name, like a biceps or a hamstring or a calf, which is called your gastroc, or your quad or whatever, they're bulky muscles.
They're bulbous.
Yeah, they're really bulky muscles. You can grab them, they move. You can feel the start and stop of them. When you squeeze your muscle tight, they tighten up, and then you can see the tendon, which usually comes to like a point. It comes to a very, very narrow focal point. So you can take a huge, massive muscle tissue and generate a huge amount of force on a very local point, and that usually moves a bone, right? So those muscles are designed for movement. We call them prime movers. They move bones, they move the body. That's what everybody trains for. It's what everybody wants. But if that's what the body wanted, was a muscle that moved things, then that's what it looks like. It makes this bulbous muscle that has a localized attachment point. But here in the core, we don't have that. We don't have that look at all. We have this much more fan-like musculature, which is a very, very broad tendon attachment point to the bony structures. So you have to wonder what's its job. So I think it makes most sense to think of its job as more of a capacitor of energy rather than a creator of energy. So if you're a quad or your biceps or your calf is a creator of energy. You squeeze it, boom, force comes out of it and moves the body. But when you squeeze your abs, like it's not really designed to generate energy or move you. It's designed to hold things. So the idea here would be like if you're throwing a baseball or throwing a javelin or striking a volleyball or whatever, you start on the ground, your feet engage the ground, and you engage with the ground and push really hard and generate a lot of force with all your big leg muscles. That force comes up through the legs, and it has to transfer through your trunk and get to your arms so this thing you're hitting or throwing can go somewhere. So for that to happen, we don't need the abs to generate force. You need to just keep that force coming from the legs up through the midsection and then get to the arm eventually. So I think that when we train the trunk, to your point, training it with that in mind is more of a capacitor is huge. So we look at a lot of carries or offsetted loading like you described, like doing a squat, holding the weight on one side. We were talking about doing squats earlier in the day today. I was talking about doing squats with guys where you're holding one dumbbell on one arm but not on the other. So there's this offloaded situation where the core has to really figure this problem out, solve it, and find stability in an unstable environment. And that's what sports is.
And that's the skill of coordination. Can you coordinate that pattern? Can you link it? Because it's not in isolation. I think that's what's fun about the wiper is you really feel like both the adductor of one leg and the abductor of another leg have to kind of go into your trunk. It's like, I'm not sure what's the leakage, but I can't hold this position. And I think that's we have a lot of benchmarks in our system. So we one way of testing the abs is to connect a dynamometer to your ankle and pull your leg in. We think of it as a hip flexion, but it's predicated on how strong your stomach is. So looking at resisted hip flexion, and I think that's a nice way of looking at stomach. But another way is to lie on your back with your arms straight, and you basically do like a pull down. It's almost like a plank. You just invert it, flip upside down with your back, and then you're basically doing plank attached to a dynamometer. And one reason why I really like doing that is because it is an assessment. You could probably go linear or diagonal or more Palloff rotary. But the idea of it is I'm looking at the mid part of the body, but it's through an arm or through a leg. And when we think of core, it has to be referenced to one of our appendages. The core does not, there's no way of contracting in isolation. Like that doesn't really happen in life. Our core breaks down whether our foot's planted or whether our hand's on something. That's where the breakdowns occur. And I think to appreciate that connection of our rotary, linear, and functional diagonal and lateral core needs to go to an appendage, and then we stress it. Can it hold together while I'm doing something? And doing a split squat with just like 45 pounds of one arm, great way of doing that. Doing a kettlebell swing with just one side, great way of doing it. That's the kind of thing, like when you load up one leg, it's just a great way of actually getting a good functional core exercise in.
Yep. And I think that on that note of development, I think that one of the best development drills we could utilize is like a Turkish get-up, where it's the same idea. You have the unilateral load, and you have to go from being on the ground to being standing. And as you move through each of those transitional positions, you have to control the core, you have to control the arms, you have to control the hips and the feet. So you have to use the whole body to get there. So that's a great developmental tool. And that is a great one. Like we talked a lot about like kind of how much load do you use. That's a really good one where you can add some load to it, and they have to figure stuff out about how to hold their position and not fail, right? Because the failure is you drop the weight on your head, so the price is pretty high. And that's part of the problem with squatting in a squat rack. You can squat in a squat rack, and if you fail, the safety bars catch you.
Right.
It's like no harm, no foul.
Right.
So you can be shitty,
right,
and lift something really heavy, suck at it, and be safe, almost because the device allows you to, if the coach allows you to, right? Mm-hmm. But in a Turkish get-up, you can't be shitty. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're going to wear it, and it's going to be an expensive dentistry bill.
Yeah.
So it's very good, like self-limiting, makes you really be honest with what you're doing.
Yeah, I like looking at the get-up, and I try and ask myself, like, can I have every female athlete that I touch by the time they're 15 if they could do that with 25 pounds? And every male athlete if they could do that with about 50 to 60 pounds? And quarterbacks, pitchers included. I think it's one of those patterns that addresses so many things that are forgotten, whether you want to call it mid-back strength overhead or you want to think of it as offset load that kind of loads up the core. It is one of my favorite exercises for the young person to figure out. And I think the big part of these exercises too is I think we're battling two things with youth sports development. You're battling, if they're a single sport athlete, how's that sport jacking up their body? Mm-hmm. And then also you're battling school. I'm sitting at a desk for 8 hours a day.
Huge,
so you're battling these things about really just culture, and strength training is the place for us to address it. So it means we have to challenge patterns that can improve all the problems that come with growth, improve all the problems that come with chronic sitting, and improve all the problems that comes with just playing one dominant sport, for your life. Because if left unchecked, the sitting is going to burn their body out. The chronic single sport athlete is going to burn their body out. And then a lot of people if they grow too fast, they're doomed. Their feet are doomed. They're going to have knee replacement no matter how many split squats they do at age 45. So we have to set up our youth for success, not only with the sport they play, but for life. And that's, I think, belongs to the coach and the PT and the chiro and the people in the movement space. Yep. Or else, or else the rate of injuries is going to keep skyrocketing.
Yeah, the overall health. It's massive. You mentioned that a few times. Like doing too little, like sitting all day and not moving, is a huge problem. And then doing too much is the other end of the spectrum, right? So somewhere in the middle. And I think that's still being explored, but we know that that's going to be the best as far as injury risk reduction. It's going to be best as far as developing confidence and developing like body awareness that you can take with you for the rest of your life. And for that reason, this is really like the last frontier. After you get through, the high school years, there's really very little development happening anymore. Even if you're in sports, if you're lucky enough to be at the D1 level and play at a D1 sport, the developmental window is really changing with the way the landscape has changed, where, now you have an athlete, before they'd go to a college, and it's pretty much guaranteed that you'd be at that college for 4 or 5 years. And, for the last several years, there have been people leaving early and stuff if they make it to the league, which is kind of the whole goal. So that's totally fine. But now we're seeing with this new ability to transfer with the portal, that people are just, 1 year, one place, then they go next school for a year, then they go another school for a year or two. There'll be 3 or 4 schools in 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, you're changing strength coaches, you're changing themes, you're changing routines, you're changing strategies for the offense and defensive units. So there's no way as an athlete that you're really developing yourself during that period of time. You're just chasing either the dollar or playing time, which, more power to you. If you earn that spot to be there, go for it. But for that reason, it's the last frontier of like from 7th grade till you're a senior in high school. You better learn who you are, how your body works, how it functions, how to load it, how to train it, so that when that starts to happen to you or you go into life and you have no more coaching beyond it, you've got some tools. Mm-hmm. That to me, I think is really what's important about our role and where we sit in this, in the community involvement and what we're all about.
Hey, as you said that, I couldn't help but think of, to some degree, late high school years and definitely college, or definitely your late teens and 20s. You're solving a lot of problems that are coming to you in a chaotic fashion. And so it's our job to give the young people, the 12-year-olds all the way up to 18, give them as many problems to solve. Make it diverse. And I think too many people are looking for the perfect program, and they're going to repeat that every day. And I think it's our job to give the 14-year-old a lot of problems. Give them a get-up, give them a swing, give them a pull-up, give them a thoracic bridge, do a full bridge, do a pistol squat, challenge them, giving them as many different things to solve with their body so that they're ready for chaos in life. We have to throw them a little bit into chaos to properly prepare them. If you just kind of go with a squat hinge mentality, and that's what we do, that works for the 20-year-old that already saw 10,000 movements. Mm-hmm. If you have that college approach to the 7th grader, you're going to lose. You need to be more diverse. And I think that's where dynamic warm-ups are wonderful, because it gives them the opportunity. Hey, can you scoop? Do a hamstring scoop, and do it until you touch the floor. Don't do it 10 times. Do it. And I've started programming my young people. I don't give them numbers. I say, do it until you reach this position. And I think that might be the better mindset, is to program with the end in mind. What is your goal with this pattern? Oh, I want them to lunge with their, hips in this position and touch this position. Okay, then do as many reps as it takes to get there. It's a tough pattern. Let's see if you can get there. And if you can find those movements, those movement riddles, those movement questions, I think it's great. I could just rattle off my favorites, including a handstand, pistol squat, full bridge, a full depth push-up. A lot of people can't do a full depth push-up.
And it's impressive.
I hate seeing a whole bunch of flat push-ups, like on-ground push-ups, and everyone's going halfway. Do it at a 45-degree angle. Go all the way down. Find success with the movement.
Isn't it amazing? That just speaks to the challenge that happens when you have someone put a number out there, like go get 40 done, as opposed to let's do 5 the right way. And that's where those things get so beat up. But yeah, it's amazing to put even 20 athletic boys or girls, especially boys, on the line and say, let's do push-ups and watch what happens.
Yeah.
Girls is a tough movement. It's tough to get that much upper body strength at that age, but it's the right movement. It's a good thing to practice,
Yeah.
I think it's because it's owning your own body weight, self-limiting, super important. I think one of the big things is hanging, hanging from a bar. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that as a people, we really get away from it. So as a young kid, you do it a lot, where you're hanging from monkey bars and swinging across like a ladder or whatever. You're always hanging on the playground and such. And then once you get past the age of maybe 8 to 10, somewhere like that, you really don't hang that much anymore.
No.
In school we used to do the rope climbs. Mm-hmm. Remember the big rope would go up to the gym ceiling, 30-foot rope. That was a climbing activity. But if you don't, that's not around anymore, because it's probably people got sued, I'm sure. And then if you don't get into climbing, like rock climbing or wall climbing, you're really not doing this movement anymore. Mm-hmm. And so Greg Cook talked a lot about this back in the day, about the idea that climbing's like crawling. Like we don't crawl anymore, and then we don't climb anymore. Everything's so convenient for us that we can walk and do things. We can reach everything we need to get to. You don't have to crawl on the ground. You don't have to climb a wall or climb up and get something. You just use a ladder, which is, makes it a lot easier. So all these kinds of things, it's like that's a skill set that we also lose. So I think it's important to hang, whether it be like do a pull-up hang, do pull-ups themselves, do a single arm hang.
Do some knee tucks, hold with the elbows flexed. There's probably at least 10 different variations of it.
Yeah, and then you're working grip strength with that activity. You're working core control, where you have to organize your core to be like, can I stabilize while I'm hanging?
That was my other principle. I don't think your core could be strong enough. I don't think your grip could be strong enough. Or in other words, there's no such thing as too strong. And if your grip is strong, it speaks to so much of your athletic potential. But there's also plenty of research on longevity. They'll look at and say that we can predict, whether or not you're going to die later on in life, how soon you're going to die, just looking at grip. It is a longevity factor. Is one of those things that is your body strong enough? Just look at someone's grip. And throughout your life, if you can at least hang, you can at least squeeze half your body weight, which is the standard. You should be able to do half your body weight with a pull. And for any kids, just start hanging more. challenge yourself with pull-up variations or knee tuck variations, or see if you could just hold with your elbows bent. And you first start with just hanging.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are the principles you got? Grip strength?
Yeah, your grip can't be strong enough. Your core can't be strong enough. So we just spoke to that. Own your body weight first. And I think, like I said, I like the addendum of owning your body weight first is, sure, challenge some resistance, because it's interesting how some resistance actually helps stabilize you. It cues the right things to work.
The goal is good movement, though. I mean, the whole point of that is good movement. So if the resistance allows you to still do it with a good movement and good technique, then by all means.
Right. And then challenge movements where the single sport athlete or the chronic sitting are affected. And I say that, for a lot of boys that are 15, their posterior line fascia doesn't open. It's restricted. And it's like, if you lie on your back, say, raise up one leg, it only goes about 45 degrees. This is a problem. We can't continue to work with this person and say this is great athletically. We need to open up to like 80, 90 degrees. And I find these occur with athletes who don't sprint. All sprinting athletes, that opens up almost by need. The body says, I cannot solve the sprinting dilemma while holding too much restriction in the posterior fascia. So when you open up your stride, you have to solve that. So for all athletes that don't ever open up into a full sprint, we have a problem. So I think looking at what does growth do? Well, if explosive growth, it jacks up your feet and it jacks up the posterior line and to some degree the front of the hips. And we have to do movements that challenge that adversity that the young person is facing.
Yeah. I'll say, just as an anecdotal personal story, like that idea of like touching your toes, right? So in basketball, my whole life, playing from like fourth grade through college, through high school, I remember specifically, obviously we'd start off every practice with stretching, static stretching, touch your toes, and I could never do it. I was always like 6 inches away. And after doing that for 4 years, I was exactly 6 inches away still after every day for 4 years. So that, I mean, the easy outcome of that is the shit doesn't work, Right. It certainly didn't work for me, right? But what I didn't know and what we didn't do during that time of my life, which I learned actually, well, in college, I became aware of it. So the teammates around me, we had some just unbelievable players, and many of which ended up in the NBA. And they too would start with static stretching. We'd start the practice with static stretching. We would not do this anymore, but this is what it was back in 20 years ago. So they'd go, and then you'd actually partner stretch. And these guys, like Luke Walton, for example, surprised me, because Luke is like big guys, like 6'9", and muscular guy, but like whatever, average, And then, but then when he stretch his hamstring, he'd have like an easy, like straight leg raise, bring his leg straight up 90 degrees, maybe even a little bit past 90. And I'm like, wow. And some of the other little guards we had Jason Gardner's a great guard, huge thighs, super strong kid. And then he'd have like at least 100 degrees of straight leg raise. I'm like, damn. I'm like, these guys are strong and flexible, and they're at the elite level, the elite of the elite, And, those guys had long professional careers. And I started to recognize that. And at this time, I was just an athlete with the rest of them. But I was like, damn, like, you're really good at this. I'm like really shitty at this, And look who continued on and who did not is what the message is there. But I ended up doing my doctorate work, and more of my kind of end presentation and dissertation, if you will, in our field, was on this idea of dynamic warm-up and dynamic stretching and the impact it had. So dynamic warm-up is like moving yoga, multiple planes, multiple movements. And one of the reasons it worked so well for me is as I started using it at that time in my life, which I was like, 22, 24 at the time, like I all of a sudden could touch my toes, which I had never been able to do in my entire life. Static stretching before practice, practicing for hours a day, working out in the weight room, traditional lifts, never got an ounce better in like a better part of 10 years. And over like a 6 to 8 week program of training, learning this new training strategy, which at the time was very forward thinking, it totally changed me. I could suddenly do these things I couldn't do before. And it wasn't because it was loaded. It was because it was dynamic movement, and it was in multiple planes, and I was forced to solve these problems that you're speaking to. And in doing that, it allowed me to be able to do that now when I want to do it. Right?
Yeah,
it's actually like it really showed me like some things in my body that I never knew, even playing every day. So now we start every team, every athlete with a dynamic warm-up. But the point is, the dynamic movement is really the solution.
Yep.
And that's what we should be striving for our kids, is teach them how to own their body, teach how to move better, and that's going to set the foundation for them to be much more successful.
I think that's where, the majority of complexity, creativity, like the fun lives. If you take like a simple workout, I almost challenge myself that probably a third of every workout should be challenging these variable motions, that it looks a little bit more fun. It's not reps of, 4 sets of 10. It might be 40 different exercises. Maybe you cluster them in 4 or 5 different groups, and I'm a challenge here. I'm going to do a rep here, a rep here, a rep here. It looks a little bit like a dynamic warm-up, like a flow, like a routine that is standing, it's movement, it's body weight loaded. It's not sitting and relaxing. Your heart rate will raise, you'll get a light sweat doing it, and you challenge the depth of your movement. And that's where I think there can be a lot of creativity. And then when it's time to get strong, pick a simple pattern, load it, exhaust the muscle, and then relish in the hormonal change that comes from that precise load in a safe way. So strength and hypertrophy and growing the body can be simple, but so much is in this realm of more dynamic motion. It is the Patrick Mahomes, it is the Tom Brady, but it is the advanced warm-up, and it should be the big show for a lot of the growing people. And I think if you can find a coach and find a program that's in that space, it's good.
Yeah, that's what you kind of want to see. Move really well, then load the heck out of it during high school years and college. And then when you get to the pros, go back to moving really well again, and you don't have to load anymore because you've had all the hypertrophy changes you need. That's pretty much, if you look at the big spectrum, what you see. But if you don't learn to move well in the beginning, you just overload bad patterns, then you end up in a hole and you're in a bad situation. But the reason you see the elite pros, the best of the best, do these funky things is because they have such a strong base that they're able to then do dynamic things off of it. So what we're suggesting is, as a youth, learn how to move really well in lots of different positions, load it as you get a little bit older and you mastered all those patterns, really load the heck out of it, build up yourself in a really strong way. You'll have such a good foundation to do that on. And then you can kind of get really advanced with your movements and get really creative and interesting and challenge yourself in ways that are very sport specific as you get to like the later part of your career.
I think the more skilled that young people are with different patterns, it has a protective layer. Mm-hmm. It is, if you know how to do 50 different patterns, you can do one pattern with a lot of load safely. But if you can only do 5 patterns, I think you're more vulnerable. So I do think that the fortification, resilience of the body, whether it's a training stress or a sports stress, it is built of really how many of these problems can they solve as a young person? As a 13-year-old, can they do a plethora of movements and be okay there? That's hard. It takes a lot of mindfulness there. It's not easy. It's not just a simple YouTube link and go ahead and do these things. It is challenging. It challenges my brain. I've been doing it for 20 years. I obsess over it. Now that my kids are doing it all and they watch me and they try and do it. But you'll see that a very athletic 6-year-old can do all these with ease. And then the 13-year-old, like, oh, what just happened? Yeah. And that's, I think, our biggest problem is, like, to some degree, the 6 and 7, 8-year-old can be phenomenal.
Yes.
And then we lose it. And can we get it back?
Yeah.
And that's harder. It's harder to get it back when the bones are longer and the muscles are bigger.
Yes. Which also goes back to the whole idea of like when you want your kid to peak, Yeah. And are the parents like, my kid's amazing and they're 8, they're going to be an all-star? Well, not really.
Yeah. Yes.
It's not necessarily true. You want to peak at 18, or a little bit later. But anyway, thanks for watching the KIMEcast. Hope this guys helps you, gives you some tips and gives you some ideas out there. We'd love to communicate with you. So feel free to DM us, hop on the messages and comment below, and we're going to interact with you guys that way. Happy to do so. So looking forward to the next one with you guys. Take care.